only one more chapter after tonight, and we'll see. We may not get through all of chapter 27 tonight, so we may have to break it down a little more, but we'll see. So last week we looked at King Agrippa and Paul's preaching to him before Agrippa and Agrippa's sister Bernice. And of course, he preached the gospel to them. And the popular verse where Agrippa says that Paul almost persuaded him, verse 28, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian, he said. We talked some about that, how that's not what is portrayed today. Of course, it's misinterpreted, taken out of context, and it's misunderstood by many in the religious world today. As far as we know, Agrippa was never saved. There's no evidence of that in secular history or biblical history either. So we'll just leave that as it is. So in chapter 27, Paul is sent to Rome. He's been in Caesarea, imprisoned, kind of under house arrest, not really in a cell, but under house arrest, away in the court of Festus, who had taken over for Felix. He's been there for over 2 years. Tonight, he's going to finally start heading to Rome. And if you look at our map that we've been using, you see where he'll leave Caesarea, go to Sidon, and then they kind of go up north the coast of Syria, and then turn at a city that I can't pronounce. Anyway, it's close to Antioch. Anyway, and on the coast of Syria, and then we'll turn there and go east over to Myra, and then on around to eventually to the island of Crete, and going further. We'll look at that later, but the rest of that later. But anyway, let's pick up in verse 1 in chapter 27. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. And this is Caesar Augustus. He's a centurion, a leader of a group of soldiers, and he's of an elite group. If he's of Augustus's band, that means he's part of Caesar's elite troops. Maybe even his own security force, private security force, if you will, or his. We think on today's terms, possibly his Secret Service type guys. Anyway, he's delivered to this centurion. And he says, and certain other prisoners. So he's not the only prisoner. There are others. These would have been, if they're going to Rome, more than likely they would have been political prisoners, similar to what Paul was. Of course, they would not have, probably not likened to Paul. These would have been hardened criminals. These were guys who had actually done something wrong, not like Paul. Paul, remember, requested to go to Caesar. These guys didn't make a request. They're being forced to go. Verse 2, and entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Now notice here he says we launched. So that means Luke was with him. Remember, Luke is the one writing this. So Luke, and then this other man, Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with them. So a man from one of the other churches, the church at Thessalonica, is with them. It doesn't really tell us here anyway how many are with Paul on this trip, but there's those that are some of his supporters, if you will, are with him. We know Luke, being a physician during Paul's missionary journeys, always seems to be Paul's personal physician during that time. And plus, he's a highly educated man also, so he's also the scribe, if you will. He's the one writing all of this, all that we see in the book of Acts. Verse 3, and the next day we touched at Sidon. And remember Sidon, it took them a day's journey to go from Caesarea to Sidon, looks like. So, he says, the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius curiously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So this centurion, Julius, is a very kind man and very understanding, and he knows Paul is not a hardened criminal. And Paul has shown through his whole ordeal that he has no intentions of escaping. He's determined to go to Caesar so he can preach the gospel to him. And this centurion Julius understands Paul's not going anywhere, so he gives him liberty. That's not the normal treatment for a prisoner. And we don't see him doing it with these other men either. It's just with Paul. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. So they went around Cyprus. If you look at the map, they didn't go to the island of Cyprus. They went around it. It says because of the winds, because the winds were contrary. In other words, the winds had gotten up, and it was too difficult for them to go there. If you notice it on the map too, it doesn't look like the city I mentioned that I couldn't pronounce there next to Antioch. It doesn't look like they stayed there. They even landed there. They just went around it. So they go around Cyprus and go to Myra, and it says, and when we had sailed over the sea of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. So it's on the southwestern tip of Asia Minor. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria, sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. So the centurion is in charge of these guys. We don't know how many men he has, but obviously he would have had to have some. He wouldn't be. You wouldn't think he would be carrying dangerous criminals by himself. That would not have been a smart idea. But he's in charge of finding ships to transport these men on. So they didn't have a scheduled slave ship, if you will. They would go to a port, wait until there was a ship going in the direction they wanted to go, and then they would, by order of Caesar, would either, doesn't really tell us here, we don't know if he paid the ship's captain for their trip, or if they confiscated the ship, we don't know. But they found another ship and went, sailed, or started on their way to Italy, it says. And he put us therein. So he put not just Paul, but Luke and Aristarchus and whoever else was with them. Like I said, it doesn't tell us yet who all was there. And we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed unto Crete, over against Salamine, Solomon. Salmon. Anyway, so if you look at the map again, you see they had to go through some islands there. After they left Myra, they went by Patira around the island of Rhodes, and there's Sinaitis, there's Solomon on the island of Crete, and so they sail to a place called Lasea on the island of Crete. So they went, and it says, and hardly passing it, came into a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. So Fair Havens was a seaport on the island of Crete, on the southern coast of Crete. Lasea is the city that was there. And when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the landing and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. So Paul knew, of course we know it was probably the Lord telling him these things, that there was danger ahead. And he tells them that it says in verse 9, when much time was spent, in other words, they spent a lot of time in this place called Fair Havens. And when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past. The sailing, the weather was changing. In other words, they were heading into the stormy time of the year. And so now Paul is telling them, we need to be careful because we could be hurt in this. Not just the ship damaged, but the men also. But the captain or the master of the ship and the owner of the ship disagreed with him. And they told the centurion not to worry about it. And because, verse 12, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. So, they're considering their options. The winter is coming. This Fair Havens port is not designed for protection in the winter, for whatever reason. And they're talking about going to Phoenice, which is a haven of Crete, it says. It doesn't, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but it's not on our map. Or I'm not seeing it anyway. But it lieth toward the southwest and northwest, unless it's, I'm not sure. It doesn't show on our map. But anyway, there's another place that they're saying will be better for them to winter in. Now, verse 13, and they're going to, as they begin to travel, they're going to run into a storm. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, losing thence, they sailed close to Crete, or close by Crete. So it says the south wind blew softly. They're thinking they're safe now. They're going to try to sail while the winds are light before the storm, try to get ahead of the storm, in other words. And they try to stay close to the island of Crete for protection from the storm, from the winds. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroslydon. From what I've read on these, it's a like a tropical storm or a cyclone in the water. It's a very dangerous time to be in a ship, especially the small ships they would have been in their day. Would not have been a good place to be during one of these types of storms. It was a very harsh storm. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. So they just let the ship go. They could no longer keep it heading into the wind for protection. They just let it go and let the wind take its course. And running under a certain island, which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. So if you look on your map, you see Claudia there on the south of Crete, southwest of Crete. Which when we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. And when we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. It's very heavy storm they're going through, and very high seas, and they're having to do things to save the ship. Remember the story of Jonah when the tempest came and they had to lighten the ship before he admitted that he was the problem. They were dumping cargo over. That's what they would have been doing here. They would have been dumping over anything that wasn't necessary, anything that to save the lives of the men on board. And he says they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands, the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. So for many days they've gone with no sunlight. They can't even see the stars. That's how dark the clouds are. It's a very large storm that they're going through, and so bad that they've had to throw out everything. So even the tackling of the ship, they've had to take care of themselves. And so, but after long absence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And Paul tells them, I told you so. I told you we should have stayed in Crete and waited till the storm was over, but they didn't listen. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island. So, after Paul tells them, I told you so, about the storm, he explains to them, the angel of God has come to him in the night and told him not to fear, told him that everyone's going to be safe, the ship's going to be destroyed, but all the men are going to be safe. And at some point, he is going to be taken to Caesar. That's a given. God's already promised that to him. And he says that he believes God. He says also, though, he says, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. So Paul is and we'll see in a bit, he's going to get to preach the gospel and be an example, a witness for Christ to these men that he's been with on this ship. We haven't seen any of that yet, but now he's getting to be. The men are scared, they're worried. Paul pulls the gospel on them, and remember, there's the other prisoners. We don't know anything about them. We don't know if they're saved or not. We know there's the centurion with them and possibly some other guards. When we also know that there's the crew of the ship, and the ship's owner is also there with them. He's been mentioned. So there's several, we don't know how many, but there's several men here that Paul is going to get to preach to. He tells them, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. So he tells them the ship's going to crash, but they're going to be thrown to an island and be safe. But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. Now, we see now a time frame. So they've entered the 14th night of this. That's a long time, 2 weeks, to have to ride out a storm in a ship that's not suitable to handle this type of storm, and to have to do all that they've done during this storm. It's been a very rough trip. So now they're getting near a country, it says, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So the water is getting shallower and shallower as they get closer to this land, to this island, or to this country. They don't know where they are for sure. They just know they're coming up on land. The ocean floor is coming up fast, and they're afraid they're about to hit rocks. Remember, they can't see good. For one, it sounds, well, we know in verse 27 it's at night. And it says about midnight, it says, so it's dark. Plus you've got clouds, and so you can't, and a storm going on, so there's no light whatsoever, unless may have some kind of light on the ship, but not much. They're afraid they're about to hit the rocks. So they cast out 4 anchors, trying to slow the ship down. And it says, and they wished for the day. Why would they wish for the day? Because, well, for one, in the day, even as cloudy as it is, they're still going to have a little bit of light, and they can see where they're at. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of a foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. So these sailors are giving up the ship. Forget about the prisoners and the centurion. They're jumping out of the ship. They're jumping ship because of the storm. They're close enough to land that they think they can swim to land and be okay, but they're going to forget about everybody else. Paul tells the centurion, if these men don't stay, the rest of us are going to die. Then the soldiers, now here we see, the centurion's there's more soldiers than just him, cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So the soldiers, cut the ropes, the anchor ropes of the boat, and let her drift. Why? Well, it's to save the ship long enough that they all can get off, until they can get closer to land. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried, and continued fasting, having taken nothing. And Paul encourages them to have a meal because they've gone, it says 14 days that they've fasted. That's a long time to go. And of course, if you think about it, on being on a ship in a storm, you probably don't want to eat anything. The motion sickness is going to be pretty horrible on a ship that small. And while the day was coming, wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. Paul says, not any of you are going to be harmed in any way. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. Paul's setting the example here, again, of the God he serves. He's slowly but surely witnessing to these men of God. And notice they follow his lead. It says they all of good cheer. They were all of good cheer, and then they all took some meat. They know the storm's about over, and they're close to land, and so they're going to eat, get their strength back, so they can do what they got to do. And we were in all in the ship 260 souls. So, I said this was a small ship. I'm talking about this is a small ship compared to our day. There's still a lot of this for their day. It was a very large ship. 260 souls. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. So one of the last things they got left in the ship is the wheat. And to lighten the load, they cast the wheat into the sea. That was their prize cargo. It would have been their big money maker that they were hauling at the time. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart struck fast and remained unmovable. But the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and go to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that that they escaped, all safe to land. Look, we'll stop there for tonight with our reading, but if you go into the next chapter, you see it looks as though the island that they go to is Malta, which is southwest of Sicily. It's where he talks about where two seas come together. You've got the Mediterranean Sea, and then north of Sicily, between Sicily and the western coast of Italy, you have the Tyrrhenian Sea. So there would have been a divide of sorts here at Malta, or close to Malta, where the seas would have divided, and there would have been a different currents and all that. We see, though, that what the angel of the Lord, or the angel of God, has told Paul has come true. All these men are going to be saved. 203 score and 16 souls. And as we get into the last chapter, Lord willing, next week, we'll see that Paul again gets to preach the gospel to everyone that he's in touch with. And we know the next chapter, he will finally arrive in Rome. He gets his opportunity with Caesar. Luke ends the book. It's not the ending of Paul, of course. We know many of the letters that he wrote were written from Rome while he was there. We know that those letters are part of our Bibles. They're what God gave us to put as His Word. And we have Paul's words as part of what Paul wrote is part of God's Word from now on. So his legacy will live on. But we have to remember, it's not, remember his writings are not about him. Paul never wrote for his own glory. He wrote for the glory of Christ. So we'll stop there for tonight. We'll take up with chapter 18 next week, and Lord willing, we'll be finishing up the book of Acts next week. And I don't know where we will go after that. We'll see what the Lord has. So we'll end there for tonight.